Welcome to the Yield Tactics Podcast, your go-to source for all topics related to yield and revenue management, pricing strategies, and industry insights. We're diving deep into the dynamic world of revenue management and pricing across various sectors, with a particular focus on travel, leisure, transportation industries, and beyond. From airlines optimizing seat inventory to hotels adjusting room rates based on demand, and even to theme parks maximizing ticket sales, yield management plays a crucial role in ensuring businesses extract the maximum value from their resources. Joining us are Yield Tactics senior consultants and partners, industry experts, thought leaders, and pioneers in the field of revenue management, who will share their expertise, experiences, and innovative strategies to help you stay ahead in this ever-evolving landscape.
This podcast is brought to you by Yield Tactics and Airline Tactics, the foremost consulting firm specializing in revenue management and pricing, serving clients worldwide.
Today, we're tackling a fundamental shift in revenue management. How do we balance profitability with customer welfare? It's not just about squeezing margins anymore, it's about building pricing strategies that are sustainable, trusted, and customer-centric, without sacrificing performance. Let's break down what that looks like in practice.
Why talk about customer welfare in RM? When people hear revenue management, they usually think about numbers, price optimization, yield curves, forecasts, demand elasticity, maybe even automation, AI, and machine learning these days. But very rarely, almost never in fact, do they stop and ask, what's happening on the customer side? And that's exactly where this episode begins. Because revenue doesn't come from a spreadsheet, it comes from people. And people, our customers, aren't passive units in a model. They're active decision makers with perceptions, expectations, and emotions. That's why customer welfare needs to be part of the conversation when we talk about revenue management, especially now. Let's be clear. Revenue management has always been about extracting value. That's the job. Finding the right price for the right customer at the right time to maximize revenue. But here's the thing. If you're extracting value without delivering value, you're building a time bomb. It might work today or next quarter, but over time, it fails. People feel cheated. They leave. They talk. Regulators step in. Your brand suffers, and your pricing power disappears. So this isn't about being nice. It's about being strategic. Now, let's define it quickly. In economic terms, customer welfare usually refers to consumer surplus, the difference between what a customer would have been willing to pay and what they actually paid. It's a measure of the value they get from the transaction beyond the price. And when we erode that too much, when we charge right up to the pain point, we risk crossing the line between smart pricing and exploitation. We'll get into the economics a bit later. But right now, let's look at this in human terms. Imagine you're booking a flight. The ticket costs $450. You would have paid up to $600. Great. You feel like you got a deal. You're happy. You might come back. You might tell your friends. You might even buy extra services. Seat selection, bag, lounge access. That's consumer surplus at work. Now imagine the same flight, same day, but the price is $599. You pay it because you have to, but you don't feel good about it. You don't book extras. You grumble. You look at competitors next time. Maybe you even post about it on Twitter. Technically, revenue management did its job. It captured the max value. But it killed the customer experience. Now multiply that by a few 100,000 customers a year. That's not theoretical anymore. That's your brand equity bleeding out. That's why customer welfare matters. If you're in a recurring purchase business, airlines, hospitality, subscription software, events, even retail, it's even more critical. You're not just selling once. You're building or destroying a pricing relationship. And customer welfare is the silent factor that determines whether your pricing feels fair or feels like a ripoff. So, in this episode, we're going to explore this concept in depth. We'll look at what customer welfare means from both economic and business perspectives, how it intersects with price optimization, why it's a blind spot in many RM strategies, and most importantly, how you can use it to your advantage without sacrificing your revenue goals. Because here's the truth: revenue management that respects customer welfare is more powerful, more sustainable, and more future-proof than revenue management that ignores it. So, let's dig deeper. What is customer welfare technically? So, now that we've established why customer welfare matters, let's get a bit more precise. What exactly is customer welfare, technically speaking? Is it just about customer satisfaction? Is it loyalty? Is it about not annoying them too much? Not quite. In economics, we talk about consumer surplus. This is the textbook definition of customer welfare. To put it simply, consumer surplus equals what the customer was willing to pay minus what they actually paid. It's a measure of the extra value the customer feels they got from the transaction. Think of it as emotional or financial profit on the customer's side. Let's take a basic example. Say someone is willing to pay $100 for a train ticket. That's their internal ceiling. It's how much the trip is worth to them based on time saved, convenience, comfort, whatever. If they find that ticket for $65, they've just gained $35 in surplus. That's value they keep. They may not consciously think of it that way, but emotionally, they feel good. They got a deal. They're more likely to view the service positively and maybe even use it again. Now imagine the same person goes to book, and it's $99. Technically, they'll still buy it. They're within their willingness to pay, but there's almost no surplus left. It doesn't feel like a win anymore. In fact, it might feel like the company knew exactly how much they'd pay and squeezed every last cent out of them. That's where perceived fairness begins to drop, even if nothing unethical happened. And that brings us to an important clarification. Customer welfare is not just a number, it's a feeling. It's about value, but also about perception. In revenue management, we're trained to optimize prices as close as possible to the customer's willingness to pay. That's the theory. That's how we maximize revenue. But in real life, it's messier. Willingness to pay isn't a fixed number. It varies across contexts, times, and emotions. And once you price right up to the psychological ceiling, you might win the transaction but lose the relationship. Now, let's bring in another layer: total welfare. In microeconomics, welfare is usually split into two parts: consumer surplus, value that goes to the customer; producer surplus, value that goes to the company, i.e., revenue minus cost. Total welfare is the sum of both. Theoretically, an efficient market maximizes total welfare, even if the split isn't equal. But in the real world, when one side takes too much, the system breaks. Customers rebel, churn, or work around the pricing system. That's what happens when the balance tips too far toward producer surplus. Let's take a real-world example. Ticket reselling. Suppose a band prices all their concert tickets at $60 to make it accessible. But the true market willingness to pay is much higher. Say $200 for front row, $120 for middle seats. What happens? Scalpers buy everything instantly and resell at higher prices. The band earns producer surplus at $60 per ticket. The scalpers take the rest. Customer welfare? Gone. Fans overpay, and the artist loses control over their pricing. What's the RM takeaway? Not pricing to market value leaves money on the table and erodes customer trust. On the other hand, pricing to the maximum doesn't guarantee satisfaction either. The art of RM is in finding the balance, where customer welfare is preserved enough to create goodwill without sacrificing revenue. A final point here: customer welfare is not the same as customer satisfaction. They're related but different. Someone might feel satisfied with the service, but still feel they overpaid. Likewise, someone might feel like they got a bargain, but be frustrated by the overall experience. Customer welfare is rooted in price versus value, while satisfaction is broader, covering expectations, service quality, delivery, and so on. But here's where they connect. High customer welfare tends to support satisfaction and loyalty. When people feel like they've received more than they gave, they remember it. They come back. They refer others. That surplus becomes emotional goodwill, and in the long run, revenue. So, to wrap up this section, customer welfare is a concept grounded in economics, but it has deep business implications. It's not fluff. It's not a bonus. It's a core part of how your pricing is experienced by the market. In the next section, we're going to talk about what happens when we cross the line, when revenue management becomes price gouging, because understanding the boundary is essential to building sustainable, trust-based pricing strategies. Revenue management versus price gouging. Let's talk about a sensitive but essential topic. Where's the line between smart pricing and outright price gouging? Because yes, there is a line. And in revenue management, we walk it every day. Here's the brutal truth. Just because a customer is willing to pay doesn't mean it's ethical or even strategic to charge them that amount. That's the tension at the heart of this section. Let's first define price gouging. In most definitions, price gouging is the practice of charging excessively high prices for essential goods or services, typically in times of crisis or constrained supply. Think $10 for a bottle of water after a hurricane, $800 for a last-minute flight when a storm is about to hit, $60 surge pricing for a 5-minute taxi ride on New Year's Eve. Legally, the term applies mostly to regulated markets and emergency contexts, but morally and reputationally, the bar is lower. You don't need to break the law to lose the trust of your customers. So, what does this have to do with revenue management? Well, here's the uncomfortable part. The exact same tools used in Smart RM, dynamic pricing, segmentation, inventory control, can be used to gouge. It's not about the method. It's about how you use it, when, and why. Let me give you a real example from the airline industry. In 2022, as pandemic restrictions eased and demand surged back, airfare pricing soared. Some last-minute fares on domestic routes hit $800, $1,000, even $1,500. Was it gouging? Technically? Number demand was high, capacity was limited. RM systems responded as designed. But to the customer, it felt like exploitation, especially after years of loyalty cancellations and deferred travel. So, what happened? Complaints rose, media got involved. Some regulators started asking questions. Suddenly, your pricing algorithm becomes a political liability. Now let's pause and ask, what's the difference between that and a regular high fare? Is it just perception? No, it's about justifiability and context. When prices rise in response to genuine market signals, limited inventory, peak demand periods, differentiated value, it's considered normal RM. But when prices rise because the customer has no other option, or when there's no added value, that's where the line gets blurry. Here's a simple test to use. Is the price increase proportional to the change in value or cost? Does the customer have alternatives or are they trapped? Would you feel comfortable justifying the price publicly, on your homepage, in a press interview, or to your own team? If the answer is no, you might be drifting into gouging territory. Now, let's bring it back to customer welfare. When customer welfare is ignored, it's much easier to cross the line without noticing. The math might still work. You may still hit your revenue targets. But over time, gouging erodes pricing power. Why? Because trust is a multiplier, and price fairness, perceived or real, is a key component of that trust. Customers don't need prices to be low. They just want them to be fair. And fairness, in most minds, means some combination of consistency, not wildly different prices without explanation. transparency, not feeling tricked, and value, feeling like what I paid matches what I got. Now let's flip the question. Can you be too cautious and leave money on the table? Yes. Avoiding all customer discomfort isn't the goal of RM, but neither is ignoring long-term impact in pursuit of short-term margin. The sweet spot lies in pricing strategies that optimize revenue while preserving surplus. That is, leaving just enough value on the table for the customer to feel good about the purchase. Here's a metaphor I like. Revenue management is not about draining the glass. It's about pouring the perfect amount. Enough for you to maximize your goals, and enough for the customer to feel quenched. You leave just enough surplus to build goodwill, but not so much that you underprice. A few examples of how this plays out in practice. Hotel industry. Charging €500 for a basic hotel room during the Olympics might make sense technically. But if your regular rate is €120 and you don't offer any added service or upgrade, it feels exploitative. Instead, bundle value. Free transfers, early check-in, breakfast. Same price, better perception. Ride-hailing apps. Uber and others faced backlash during surge pricing events tied to emergencies. Their solution? Cap surge multipliers in sensitive situations. That's RM, with a social contract. E-commerce. Some online retailers now show price history or fair price badges to signal transparency. Customers feel respected, not squeezed. So what's the bottom line here? Revenue management must operate with guardrails. Guardrails that protect customer trust, pricing integrity, and long-term brand value. That doesn't mean being soft. It means being strategic. You can and should capture value, but not at the cost of your future pricing power. Because once customers feel gouged, they don't forget. They seek alternatives. They downgrade loyalty. They hold back on extras. And that, over time, is far more expensive than any short-term gain. In the next section, we'll explore how perceived fairness and transparency influence customer behavior, and how you can design your RM strategy to account for those psychological factors, not just economic ones. Perception of fairness and the psychology behind pricing. Let's get into the human brain for a minute. We've talked about customer welfare in economic terms. We've looked at the line between revenue management and gouging. Now we need to understand how customers interpret pricing, because in the real world, it's not the number that matters. It's what that number means to the person seeing it. And that's where psychology comes in. Perception of fairness is not rational. It's emotional, social, and often counterintuitive. You might price something with complete logic, based on cost, demand, elasticity, capacity, seasonality, and still get a backlash. Why? Because customers don't care about your algorithm. They care about their sense of value, their sense of justice, and whether they feel respected or tricked. Let's unpack the main psychological drivers of pricing perception. Reference prices, what I think this should cost. Every customer walks into a buying situation with a mental benchmark. It may not be accurate, it may not be fair, but it's there. That's the reference price, a sort of internal anchor for what something ought to cost. If you quote me €800 for a short-haul flight, I usually pay €120 for. I don't care about your load factors or fuel surcharges. You've just violated my anchor. That triggers price shock and the perception of unfairness. Important point, customers don't care if your price is correct. They care if your price makes sense in the context they're used to. What can RM do about it? Manage the reference. Use messaging to reframe value. Includes priority boarding, fast track, lounge. Use gradual price ladders rather than sudden spikes. Use historical comparisons only if they work in your favor. Don't assume customers forget. Consistency. Why did they pay less than me? Here's a universal truth. People hate paying more than others for the same thing. Even if the price was fair in isolation, discovering that someone else got a better deal feels unjust. We see this all the time in hospitality, airlines, retail. The problem isn't the price, it's the lack of explanation. Customers don't expect total uniformity, but they do expect a reason for the variation. Smart revenue management teams do two things here. Minimize intra-customer conflict by segmenting effectively. Don't let two people in the same room compare drastically different rates. Tell the story. If someone booked early, show that the rate was an advance price. If someone bundled, show the added value. Don't leave gaps for the customer's imagination to fill in the worst-case scenario. Transparency doesn't mean showing your algorithm. It means showing that there is a logic, and it's applied consistently. Intentions matter. Are you trying to screw me? This one is subtle but powerful. Customers judge not just the price, but the intentions behind it. Is this company trying to help me or exploit me? It's not about generosity. It's about alignment. Customers want to feel that you're on their side, that your incentives aren't purely extractive. Here's where things like bundling, free cancellations, or even surge pricing caps play a role. These are signals that say, we want to make money, but not at any cost to you. And remember, perception of exploitation can cause irrational behavior. People may abandon a purchase they still want, just to avoid feeling taken advantage of. That's not economic behavior. That's emotional defense. Framing in context, how is this price presented? Two identical prices can feel completely different depending on how they're shown. Let's take an example. Option A, 199 euros base fare, plus 48 euros fees, plus 20 euros for luggage. Option B, 267 euros all-inclusive fare with full flexibility. Technically the same, but emotionally, completely different. One feels like death by 1,000 cuts. The other feels clear and decisive. This is what behavioral economists call framing, and it's a huge factor in perceived fairness. Smart revenue managers work with marketing and product teams to present pricing in a way that respects the customer's cognitive load. That's not window dressing. It's strategic. Control and choice. Did I have a say? One final psychological insight. People are much more accepting of high prices when they feel like they had a choice. This is why optional upgrades, fare families, and seat selection work well. You can price high, but if the customer chose it, they own the decision. They feel empowered. It's the same reason why you must pay 30 euros for this seat feels worse than, do you want to add a seat with extra legroom for 30 euros? One is a fee. The other is a choice. It changes everything. So, what does this mean for RM? It means pricing doesn't live in a vacuum. It lives in a customer's brain. And that brain is comparing, judging, feeling, and reacting at every stage. If you want to build sustainable revenue strategies, you need to go beyond pure optimization. You need to anticipate emotional reactions, not just price elasticity. Design pricing structures that feel fair, not just profitable. Communicate value, not just extract it. Because here's the paradox. A customer who feels fairly treated is more likely to accept a higher price. A customer who feels tricked will reject even a fair one. Fairness is leverage. Use it. In the next section, we'll explore how some of the most successful companies design for customer surplus intentionally, even when they could have charged more. We'll look at examples from airlines, subscription businesses, and retail where leaving money on the table turned into long-term brand power and pricing resilience. Strategic use of customer surplus. When and why to leave money on the table. Let's flip the usual revenue management mindset on its head. So far, we've looked at how to extract value from each customer segment based on willingness to pay. But now we're going to explore when not to do that. Yes, you heard that right. There are times when the smartest move is to leave money on the table. Why? Because optimizing for the long game sometimes means giving the customer a better deal than strictly necessary. This is where we shift from tactical pricing to strategic pricing. Let's unpack the logic and look at real-world examples. What is leaving money on the table? In classic microeconomics, if a customer would have paid 120 euros, but you only charge them 80 euros, the 40 euro difference is consumer surplus, value that could have been captured by the seller but wasn't. Revenue management usually tries to minimize this, but sometimes you want to protect or even enhance that surplus. Why? Because that 40 euros can act as a trust-building mechanism, a brand differentiator, a barrier to churn, a marketing story, especially if it leads to word of mouth. In other words, customer surplus can be strategically valuable when it pays to leave money behind. Let's go through a few clear situations where leaving money on the table is not just defensible, it's smart business. Subscription or repeat purchase models. Think of Amazon Prime, Spotify, Netflix, or any subscription-based product. If you gouge up front, you risk short-term profit at the cost of lifetime value. Many of these companies offer free trials, student pricing, or introductory discounts. Why? Because they're not trying to extract every euro from your first transaction. They're betting on future behavior. The key idea here is simple: maximize total customer value, not just transactional revenue. Word of mouth and trust-based businesses. Customers love feeling like they got a deal. It becomes part of the story they tell others. Think about Costco's strategy. They have a strict rule that no item is marked up more than 14 to 15%. Even when they could charge more, they don't. Why? Because their brand is built on trust. Customers believe Costco is on their side. That psychological edge drives massive loyalty and scale, far more valuable than squeezing out a few extra dollars per sale. Airlines, hotels, and even B2B services can adopt similar tactics. The question is, do your prices reflect your values and your promise to customers? Building a new market or penetrating a new segment. This is where strategic pricing becomes a market entry weapon. Say you're a new low-cost airline trying to enter a saturated market. You intentionally price below what you could charge. Yes, it's leaving money on the table, but you're buying market share, habit formation, and visibility. This is common in tech too. Freemium models, early access discounts, even free tiers are all about strategic surplus, offering more value than strictly necessary to hook the user. The idea? Win now, monetize later. Customer recovery and retention scenarios. Sometimes things go wrong. Delays, poor service, system errors, whatever it is, the customer's experience was subpar. In those moments, giving away value can prevent churn, negative reviews, and reputational damage. A hotel offering a free breakfast after a loud night. An airline waiving a change fee after a long delay. A call center issuing a voucher for bad service. These are not random acts of kindness. They are deliberate decisions to protect long-term revenue through short-term generosity. Customer surplus becomes your shock absorber. The calculated trade-off: margin versus loyalty. Of course, this isn't charity. It's business, which means you still need to quantify the trade-off between capturing margin and creating surplus. The questions to ask are, is the surplus generating repeat behavior? Is it improving brand perception? Is it helping you gain market position? Is it defensible against competitors? If yes, then you can model this as an investment, not a loss. Some industries even formalize this. For example, hospitality loyalty programs often leave money on the table for elites, but it pays off in retention. Travel credit cards offer perks that far exceed their cost to retain high-margin users. Frequent flyer upgrades may give away high-value seats, but they build irrational loyalty. Real-world example, Southwest Airlines. Let's look at Southwest Airlines in the US. For decades, they refused to charge bag fees even when competitors were raking in billions from them. Why? because the bags fly free policy was part of their brand. It wasn't about the 25 euros. It was about simplicity, fairness, and trust. Sure, they could have increased revenue per pax, but they judged that the surplus left with the customer led to more bookings, higher loyalty, and better differentiation. And they were right. In fact, they used that surplus as a marketing weapon, turning what others saw as lost revenue into a powerful advantage. Don't just capture value, design it. Here's the takeaway. Smart revenue managers don't just extract value. They design systems that create value for both the business and the customer. That includes knowing when to stop, when to say, we could charge more, but we won't, because this customer surplus is actually working for us. The ultimate goal isn't to squeeze every euro from every seat. It's to build durable revenue rooted in trust, perception, and behavior. So next time your model says, we can get 200 euros for this seat, ask yourself, is it worth it? Is the extra 30 euros helping or hurting our long-term game? Would a delighted repeat customer be more valuable? Sometimes the best pricing strategy is walking away from the extra euro on purpose. Next, in Section 6, we'll explore how regulation and public policy see customer welfare, what governments, watchdogs, and competition authorities expect from pricing behavior, and how customer welfare is increasingly becoming a compliance issue, not just a branding one. Regulation and public policy, the role of customer welfare in oversight. Let's now switch gears. So far, we've talked about customer welfare as a strategic business lever. But in this section, we'll look at it from a policy and regulatory perspective, because regulators care about customer welfare too. And they don't just hope companies will consider it. They're increasingly building rules and frameworks that enforce it. So whether you're in pricing, product, or revenue leadership, it's essential to understand how your pricing decisions might be judged externally and what the consequences might be. Let's get into it. Why do regulators care about customer welfare? Governments and competition authorities exist to protect the public interest. In economic terms, that often translates into efficient markets, fair competition, protection against exploitation. So when companies use pricing strategies that reduce consumer surplus too aggressively, regulators may step in, especially if there's limited competition, there's asymmetric information, there's evidence of discrimination or manipulation. In short, revenue optimization is not always regulation-proof. Price discrimination, legal versus problematic. Let's take one of the cornerstones of revenue management, price discrimination. Economically, it makes perfect sense. Charge more to people who are willing to pay more. Offer discounts to price-sensitive customers to increase volume. But from a policy lens, things get trickier. Some forms of price discrimination are accepted, like student or senior discounts, encouraged, like off-peak pricing that reduces demand spikes. But others are heavily scrutinized, like dynamic pricing that feels unfair or opaque. What regulators don't like? Pricing based on personal attributes like age, gender, or race. Customers being charged more without knowing why. Algorithms that perpetuate systemic bias. So even if your model says, we can get more from this user, you need a defendable logic for it, one that passes the smell test both economically and ethically. Regulatory focus areas around the world. Let's look at some real-world pressure points where regulators are focusing. Airline and travel pricing. In Europe, airlines have faced scrutiny for things like hidden fees, e.g. charging for seat selection or payment methods. Lack of transparency in total prices. Price differences based on browser, device, or location. The EU has intervened on these issues. In 2011, the EU Commission forced airlines to disclose final prices upfront to avoid misleading customers. Meanwhile, in the US, the Department of Transportation has ongoing investigations into junk fees and misleading price structures. So the message is clear. Don't just optimize price, be transparent about it. digital platforms, and dynamic pricing. Companies like Uber, Amazon, and Airbnb use highly dynamic pricing algorithms. That's efficient, but also scary for regulators. Why? Because pricing can change second to second without explanation. The logic behind it is often black boxed. There's a risk of algorithmic discrimination or collusion. The European Union's Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act are explicitly targeting these concerns. And in the US, the FTC has warned that unfair pricing models driven by AI may violate consumer protection laws. So again, dynamic pricing is not illegal, but it must be explainable, fair, and non-discriminatory. Competition and predatory pricing. Another angle is pricing that appears too aggressive, especially when a company is dominant in its sector. Let's say a major hotel chain undercuts everyone with prices that look unsustainable. That may be fine short term. But if it leads to small competitors being forced out, regulators could argue it's anti-competitive. Predatory pricing is difficult to prove, but it's on the radar, especially in markets with few players. So don't just ask, can we afford this pricing strategy? Also ask, could this be seen as anti-competitive? Customer welfare as a regulatory metric. In the past, regulators often focused on market share, mergers, or monopolies. But that's changing. Today, they're more interested in outcomes for consumers. Are customers paying fair prices? Is innovation being stifled? Are people confused or manipulated? In other words, customer welfare is becoming a regulatory KPI. In fact, some merger approvals in tech and telecoms now require proof that the deal won't harm consumer surplus, not just competition metrics. And in pricing, there's increasing push for companies to provide plain language explanations of how prices are set, opt-out mechanisms for algorithm-driven personalization, data privacy protections related to pricing personalization. The direction of travel is clear. More power to consumers, more transparency, more accountability. What companies can do to stay ahead? If you're in revenue management, you don't want to be caught off guard. So here are 5 principles to keep your strategy smart and safe. Build transparency by design. Don't hide fees or structure your pricing to confuse. Clarity builds trust and keeps regulators at bay. Audit your algorithms. Make sure your pricing tools aren't unintentionally creating bias or discrimination. Use internal reviews and ethical AI checks. Design fair pricing logic. Have a clear, explainable rationale behind price differences. Can you defend it in a press interview or in front of a regulator? Monitor competitive behavior. Watch not just what you do, but what others in your sector are doing. If everyone's charging the same mysteriously high price, regulators might suspect collusion, even if unintentional. Be proactive with policy teams. Large firms now include legal and compliance experts in the pricing design process. Make that part of your workflow if you haven't already. Customer welfare isn't just ethical, it's strategic. Let's be honest. Some companies won't care about regulation until it hits them hard. But the smart ones see the upside of doing things right. Better brand equity, fewer lawsuits, higher trust and retention, stronger reputation with investors and the public. And let's not forget, regulators are often slow-moving until they aren't. Just ask tech companies how fast the tone changed when governments finally caught up. So if you're serious about pricing maturity, think beyond optimization. Think about fairness, transparency, and trust as part of your pricing DNA. In our next and final section, we'll tie it all together and explore how you can build a revenue management strategy that balances customer welfare and profitability, and why this balance is likely to define the next era of pricing excellence. Balancing profitability and customer welfare, a new mandate for revenue managers. Let's bring it all together. We've gone deep into the economics, the psychology, and the policy implications of customer welfare. Now it's time to face the big question. Can you actually balance profitability with customer welfare? Or is that just a nice theory? Here's the good news. Not only is it possible, it's increasingly necessary. And here's the catch. It's harder than it sounds, because traditional revenue management has trained us to optimize for the company. Now we need to start optimizing with the customer. Let's explore how. The old playbook: extract first, defend later. Let's be honest. Classic revenue management taught us: find price sensitivity, squeeze every dollar from high-value segments, use fences and restrictions to protect yields, use opacity and segmentation to reduce friction. And it worked, financially. But in many industries, that approach is now running into customer fatigue. Customers don't want to be tricked by drip pricing, be penalized for not understanding the rules, be offered personalized prices that seem arbitrary, be outplayed by an algorithm that knows more than they do. The result: loss of trust, negative press, regulation, churn. The industry is being forced to evolve from extractive to collaborative. A new North Star: sustainable yield. What does balancing profitability and customer welfare really mean? It means moving from how much can we get from the customer right now to how can we grow revenue in a way that's sustainable, fair, and creates loyalty. This is the concept of sustainable yield. It's not about maximizing revenue at any cost. It's about maximizing lifetime value, brand trust, and competitive defensibility, while still making the numbers work. Think of it like farming. You don't strip the soil for a record harvest if it means killing next year's crop. You manage for health and yield. Building the balance. 5 practical levers. Let's now break it down into action. Here are 5 practical levers to balance profit and customer welfare. Lever 1. Segment by value and vulnerability. Yes, keep identifying high-yield customers, but also start mapping vulnerable segments. First-time buyers, low digital literacy users, budget-sensitive families, elderly or less mobile populations. Why? Because high value doesn't always mean low risk. And exploiting vulnerable users, even unintentionally, can backfire, reputationally and financially. Start asking, is this segment price tolerant or just unaware? Design fences and offers accordingly. Lever 2. Design for transparency without killing margin. There's a myth that transparency destroys pricing power, but the opposite is often true if done well. Some tactics to consider: replace hidden fees with modular pricing, clear but optional. Use explainers to justify why prices vary, e.g. demand, flexibility. Offer fair comparisons. Choose between flex and saver. Here's what you get. Make transparency part of the customer journey, not a compliance afterthought. It builds trust and reduces refund requests, call center escalations, and negative reviews. Lever 3. Empower the customer to choose fairly. Choice is powerful when it's real. Instead of manipulating choice architecture to steer customers toward high-yield options, consider using default neutral pricing pages, giving intelligent filters, e.g., show best value for families, showing price trajectories so customers feel more in control, e.g., prices expected to rise in 3 days. The goal is not to remove pricing psychology, but to use it ethically. You can still nudge, but don't deceive. Lever 4. Reframe revenue KPIs with a customer lens. This is where things get uncomfortable. If your KP are still yield per available unit, revenue per seat or room, daily average rate, and nothing else, you're optimizing blind. Start adding revenue per loyal customer, net promoter score by fare class, customer lifetime revenue versus acquisition cost, upsell conversion without churn. These are blended metrics. They force you to look at the full picture. Revenue without retention is a sugar high. Revenue with welfare is the long game. Lever 5. Test for value fairness in A/B pilots. Here's something few pricing teams do. Run experiments that include a customer perception variable. We often A/B test for revenue lift, conversion, margin impact. But what about perceived fairness score? Likelihood to recommend, trust uplift? These are soft, but they're powerful. They reveal whether your pricing feels justified to the buyer, not just efficient for you. Start bringing qualitative data into your quantitative testing. The best strategies win on both. Culture change, beyond the revenue team. Let's be real. No revenue manager can do this alone. Balancing profitability and customer welfare requires product teams to build transparent options, marketing to communicate value clearly, customer service to flag patterns of dissatisfaction, legal and compliance to de-risk innovation. This is a cross-functional shift. But revenue management can lead it because we're closest to the trade-offs. So step up. Don't just forecast demand, forecast impact. Don't just explain yield curves. Explain value curves. Be the bridge between math and meaning. The big payoff, resilient revenue. Let's finish with the why. Balancing customer welfare doesn't just make you feel good. It future-proofs your business. Because here's what happens when you get it right. Customers understand and accept price differences. Regulators back off because your logic is fair. Press coverage improves or disappears. Retention rises. Lifetime value grows. Your brand becomes defensible because it's trusted. And ironically, that's when you can charge more, not less. Because when customers believe the game isn't rigged, they're more open to value-based pricing. You're not fighting for every cent. You're co-creating value and sharing the upside. That's the future of revenue management. Not just maximizing what customers pay, but maximizing what they're happy to pay.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to catch every upcoming episode. And if you have any questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out to us.
Stay connected with us on LinkedIn and visit our websites yieldtactics.com and airlinetactics.com for more exclusive content and information about our consulting and training services. From our websites, you can download the Yield Tactics magazine for free, featuring in-depth articles covering topics such as organizational transformation, advanced pricing techniques, marketing, revenue optimization, and distribution. The ideas and opinions expressed by our guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or endorsements of Yield Tactics. Also, when we mention specific companies or products, it's important to note that such references do not constitute an endorsement by Yield Tactics, nor do they imply any business relationship between us.